Hey family, thank you for tuning into Our Roots podcast with Joseph Baba Ifa, where only the strongest roots see the light, brought to you by 𝗏𝗏𝗿𝗏 Candles and more. And if you haven't had the opportunity, please like this video, share, comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hey Phil.
Hey, happy Sunday, everybody. Don't forget to join our membership program. We have tons of goodies for everybody in there. We got separate tiers, all offering perks just for you. So don't forget to join that. But I'm doing well, brother. How about you?
All is well, all is well. Getting ready for this new episode. Today we're going to be talking about a gentleman known as Osun.
Osun. Okay, I don't think I'm familiar with this one.
Yeah, he's pretty obscure, because there's a big controversy about him in general, right? We have two very different concepts about this Orisha, via 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 or Lukumi. So we're going to get into both of them and kind of see where we land.
Okay, all right, let's do it.
Awesome. So I'm going to start with the 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 standpoint of things. So when we talk about Osun, the word Osun actually means I sleep. And it makes reference to the character of this deity in various 𝗃𝗏𝗿𝗏, where him sleeping actually was taboo or punished because he was actually the guardian of a couple people's homes. One of them being Orunmila's and the other being 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗲𝗏's, depending on the sign that you look at. But where the real dichotomy comes in between these two traditions about this deity or tool is that in 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 practice, he's not seen as an Orisha. He's seen as a staff, right? And when we look at it, it is made out of iron. It's long. It's usually around the height of the 𝗿𝗏𝗸𝗏, depending on the height of that brother. And you'll see these four like conical bells that are vertical in stance, and then there will be a plate on top of it, and then you'll have a bird resting on top of that in flight. And the bird within 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 is recognized as the 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁 bird, which is one of the most sacred birds, if not debatably the most sacred within our whole spirituality.
Can you say that bird again? What's it called again?
𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁.
Okay.
Right? So this staff is ultimately property of the 𝗏𝗏𝗹𝗁s. Now, you have a couple people who say, well, Osun belongs to 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 as well. Well, here's the thing. Within 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 practice, the 𝗏𝗏𝗹𝗁 is the one who actually has Osun implanted, usually at his front door, to be able to protect against the 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁𝗍. The 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁𝗍, being characterized as birds, only respect birds. That's why the bird that's on top of Osun, or Osun himself, is the one who's able to deflect them, being that the 𝗃𝗏𝗍 are always trying to plague Orunmila's home somehow, or his practitioners. So that's why it's used there to be able to scare away the bird spirits. It was almost like the first scarecrow. That concept can be found in the 𝗿𝗲𝗿𝗏𝗿𝗏 as well as 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗏.
Okay.
And what happened is Osun became property of Orunmila because of that same fact. He needed somebody to be able to protect his home. Now, you can find this literature in the 𝗿𝗲𝗿𝗏𝗿𝗏 Osun, or Ater Osun, or 𝗿𝗏𝗏 Lasun, which basically says in 𝗿𝗏𝗏 was where Osun presented himself. And what happened was Orunmila lived on a second story, right? It's kind of like an apartment building, I'm not sure, or his home had 2 floors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't realize that the people that lived downstairs or next to him, however you want to interpret it, were very jealous of him. And they wanted to eliminate him because he was basically having a monopoly on all of the Ifa practice. Everybody would go to him for divinations or sacrifice or what have you. He was just a really prosperous guy, very humble. And one day, while he was sleeping, they decided that they were going to light his house on fire.
Oh, gosh.
And, get rid of him that way. But Osun, Orunmila's, I guess you could say roommate, right, or guardian, felt the heat coming up and started bouncing or tipped over. And when Orunmila saw this, he was like, what's up with you? He's like, they're setting the house on fire, bro. And Orunmila had to grab Osun and jump out of the second floor and run away because, his enemies weren't going to stop until he was dead. So there's a couple key metaphysical interpretive points here. If you look at it, Osun lived with Orunmila, right? And what occurred was when the heat would arrive or the attack, Osun would start jumping up and down. That's why when the Osun staff tips over, it's usually time to perform divination or at least reach out to your elders, depending, because in the Afro-Cuban tradition, we give Osun to everybody who receives Ifa, but a miniature one, right? And because Osun doesn't only necessarily represent the head, he represents consciousness. So if Osun represents our consciousness and our stability of mind and being, if he tips over for any reason, we have an issue, right? And Orunmila, based on Osun's alert, in the story jumping or in real life tipping over, he was able to avoid death, right? That's why it's so key where if that happens, something has to be done. Now, the interesting thing about the Osun in Nigeria being property of the Babalawos, where the Babalawos are really the only ones who provide Obi to Osun. Osun eats every time Orunmila eats. They're inseparable. Osun is considered Orunmila's staff, most importantly, because after 𝗃𝗏𝗃 occurred, Orunmila said, I can never be without you. We must be inseparable. That's why till this day, Osun is ultimately Orunmila's property, whether it be in 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 or Lukumi. But one of the key things and differences on that side versus over here is that Osun does not get filled with anything. Our Osun looks very different, and we'll get into the shape momentarily. But there's no way to fill anything. But what you will see is when you sacrifice to Osun, and Osun can be found in various verses over there, really any verse that ends in Osun, like all of the Irosuns and forward or backwards formation, have to do with this Orisha. Because you can't basically spell Irosun without Osun. Like 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 basically speaks of the staff of Osun when it first guarded the gates of Ife and things like that. Their Osun cannot be filled. But what they do is when you feed Osun for whatever reason, you take the head of the bird, and there's actually a little like, what is that? Like a spade or like basically a spike that comes out of the staff where you actually, through the eyes, a little bit gruesome, you put the bird's head there and they accumulate, and that creates energy and things like that. And when you implant it, it takes certain ceremonies at the front and whatnot that a Babalawo will be able to provide. Osun can only be provided by Babalawos, by the way.
Okay.
You have this new school based on some literature that was very biased that says, no, if the son of Shango has 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗃𝗃 on his head, which doesn't exist, being that 𝗃𝗏 or any of the signs of the shell or singular Odu, they can mount Osun. Or no, the sons of Obatala can mount Osun as well. Pretty erroneous, unfortunate to say, because when you look at the Odu of Ogunda Irosun or Ogunda Kolosun or Ogunda Soro, Osun was the property of Obatala. And just like most of the things that ended up with the other Orishas originally were with Obatala, because Obatala was the owner of everything. So what ended up happening is Obatala had a beautiful white goat as a pet, right? He didn't eat masculine animals, at least in this story. He had the masculine ones as pets. And he had this beautiful white goat. And Obatala was a traveling man, so he would go to and from his home and, make money and do stately things. And his guardian or his security system was Osun, right? The Akalama Bowbird. And Osun had gone to visit Orunmila randomly, and the Odu Ogunda Osun was revealed, where Ifa told him to not consume alcohol. Forgive me.
Okay.
And when Obatala left on his next trip, 3 people showed up at his doorstep. And one was 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗃, the other was Ogun, and the other was 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗃. And they looked at Osun and they said, man, Osun, you really never have any fun, bro. Why don't you have a drink with us? The boss is gone. Hang out with us, bro. Be cool. And Osun was like, bro, Orunmila told me not to drink. I'm on the clock, about Allah's goat. I'm not going to do that. And they kept on and kept on and kept on. And Osun fell victim to peer pressure and had a couple drinks.
Uh-oh. Okay.
What he didn't realize is he was the only one drinking because the other guys were faking it. And what they did was they kidnapped the goat, they slaughtered it, they ate it, and what they did was they left the blood on Osun's lips with the body there, or whatever was left, bones, carcass, etc. So when Obatala came back the next day, he saw his goat dead at the door. He saw Osun passed out drunk with a bottle and the blood on his lips. So, you kind of look at it, you're like, this guy killed my goat. And Obatala woke him up and said, how could you betray me like this? He said, no, it wasn't me. It was the 3 guys who hang out at the corner doing nothing all day. And he was like, what guys? And when he looked over in the distance, he saw 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 running to the next land to not be, convicted. And 𝗏𝗏𝗏 cursed Osun out of his house. And one of the curses he gave him was, you'll never be able to sleep. That's why you hear the song, Osun moriro como dubule, urunganga la Osun, etc. And when Osun was expelled from 𝗏𝗏𝗏's house, 𝗏𝗏𝗏's son, Orunmila, said, I know that you're innocent. I couldn't get involved, but if you want, you can live with me, and you can serve me, and we'll learn from our mistakes. And that's where 𝗏𝗏𝗏's ownership of Osun transferred to Orunmila, and Osun said, I'll never live with 𝗏𝗏𝗏 again because he didn't trust me, that I wasn't the one who did it. But at the same time, he was a little too strict to the point where he forced me into having a drinking episode. So if we interpret that, that's why Orunmila is the sole proprietor of the Opa Osun, as it's known, or the Osun staff, right? Our 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 brothers state that the spirituality of this deity lives within the metal and the consecration, so therefore there's no reason to fill it with anything, which is perfectly legitimate because Ifa is energy, and obviously this was around far before our Osun, presumably was around. Another interesting fact about Osun in Nigeria, from what I understand, there is no initiation into Osun. You can receive your Osun icon as Babalawo, but other than that, it's not that there's like a priesthood. Like, for example, I'm crowned Osun, or any random person that's crowned, I don't know, Lokun or what have you. It's a little bit different. But you do have Osun being a very big focal point within like the blacksmiths and things like that, because they're the ones who ultimately confectioned it. And all the blacksmiths over there are children of Ogun, or worshippers of Ogun. That's why when you look at the disciples of Orunmila, or some people say the people who actually initiated Orunmila, Amosun y Amorun, Amosun y Amorun were actually godchildren of Oguns, and they were blacksmiths apparently. And Amosun was given the name based on him being able to confection that icon along with Amorun. So, it's really ultimately just, property of them, and them delegating it to Orunmila to be distributed. So Ogun has a lot to do with this deity as well, which makes sense because if you look, he had an interaction in Ogun Osun that wasn't that great, right? But ultimately, Osun was born in the Odu of Baba Ifa. He's been around since the very beginning. And that kind of brings full circle to the 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 standpoint of things. But when we delve into the story now of Baba Ifa, it speaks of when the Osun staff was first constructed to be able to defend the city of Ife, right? And the Babalawo that was identified to attend to Osun was 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗏, right? And, people were going back to Olodumare saying, hey, your son isn't doing that great with his attention to the Opa Osun. Things are happening. We're getting robbed. There's witchcraft befalling upon us. We have an imminent threat from our enemies abroad. What can we do about this? And Olodumare called upon his oldest son, who was 𝗃𝗶𝗍𝗏. And he said, I need you to go over there and replace your brother. And 𝗃𝗶𝗍𝗏 knew that Osun's character was a little volatile, so he wanted to do this in the most political way possible. And the reason Olodumare selected him is because he knew 𝗃𝗶𝗍𝗏 was a very organized guy. He was very punctual. He was basically the manipulator of the sun. He's like, this is who I need kind of attending that. So he performed divination, right? And ironically, it's debatable. Did 𝗃𝗶𝗍𝗏 come out? Did Osun come out? But the ebo that was identified was he had to do it with feathers. And when he did that, he kind of confectioned like a cloth, somewhat even similar to what the Oboni shawl might look like. And when 𝗃𝗶𝗍𝗏 arrived, he actually saw Osun sleeping next to the Osun staff. And he was like, this is what everybody's been talking about. This guy doesn't want to work. So, he nudged his brother awake. They ceremonially embraced, Osun was like, I'm so happy to see you. 𝗃𝗶𝗍𝗏 said the same. And 𝗃𝗶𝗍𝗏 said, Dad sent me. And Osun was like, well, what do you want? He said, well, he wants me to take care of the Osun staff from this point forward. And he was like, oh, because he thinks I'm not capable enough? He said, no, not at all. But he wants you to focus on things that don't, that aren't going to take that much strain. You've worked long enough. He wants you to be able to relax and enjoy yourself. And as a gift, he sent you this. And he gave basically, you've seen the show Seinfeld, right?
Of course.
Do you remember when Kramer got the code of Joseph and the seven color whatever?
I don't.
It was an amazing episode. Like, you know, he got caught up in a Cadillac. He was looking like a panderer. But that's basically what 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗍 gave to Osun. And Osun was a very flashy guy. And when he gave him that piece of clothing, he said, you know what, bro, you're right. I'm exhausted. I really don't want to do this anyway. I'm happy he's retiring me. You know, if anybody needs clothes or whatever, just come see me. I love you. And, you know, they embraced, and 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗍 became the manipulator of Osun, right? So, you know, looking at that and interpreting Ifa, it speaks of how Osun literally was the cornerstone of Ife, which is our spiritual epicenter, right? So he goes all the way back to the beginning. And this bird, the 𝗃𝗃𝗹𝗁, as well, performed a bow to be able to beat out the other birds and be identified with this icon. You know, it has very specific characteristics where it doesn't sleep, it's alert. It really embodies what you'd want in a security system, you know? So that's the 𝗃𝗂𝗃 viewpoint of things, right? A little more streamlined.
Wait, hold on. When you say 𝗃𝗂𝗃, do you mean that just like an older interpretation?
So basically, when we say the word 𝗃𝗂𝗃, we speak of tradition, right? So what happened was, you know, presumably, and it's not that Lukumi wasn't around back then. Lukumi is, you know, a mixture or a hybrid of all the different clans in Nigeria basically converging upon each other in Cuba and giving each other their best practices to be able to reconstruct a faith, which has proven to be very effective, because if not, I wouldn't be here. But when we talk about 𝗃𝗂𝗃, we're talking about possibly one of the most original manifestations of Ifa, period. So, you know, the way they do things has to be taken into account, because definitely that was one of the groups that we pulled upon when we got to Cuba to be able to construct our faith. So for confirmations and things like that, we can get quite a few from those brothers and sisters. So we appreciate them.
Okay.
But we do have other aspects of Osun that really aren't seen in the old world practice of 𝗃𝗂𝗃. So when we get to Lukumi has a little bit of a different concept when it comes to Osun. Osun within Lukumi is seen as Orisha. You know, somebody that was and ultimately transitioned. But when we talk about Osun, his spirituality and life story, apart from the Odus that we've already mentioned, you know, can be found in Odus like 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲 or even 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗍, right? When we go back to the Odu of 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗍, where 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗍 was the first Orisha, and he had his wife, whatever you want to call her, Oshanla, Odua, Yemu, etc. They had children, the oldest being Ogun. Eshu was another one, and the youngest being Orunmila. Shango was there as well, as basically 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗍's adopted son, even though he didn't know it. And they would kind of function, you know, kind of like on a Mount Olympus type concept. And 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗍, once again, was a traveling man. He was always, you know, doing other things. He was out of the house. He was, you know, trying to propagate, you know, the population and spirituality of Ifa. But when he would leave, he didn't realize that his son Ogun had, you know, inappropriate intentions with his mother. Now, I won't go into the details because, you know, it's known as the unspeakable story.
Yeah.
But the way Ogun was able to do this was by kicking Eshu and Orunmila out of the home, being that Shango was usually out and about, and he would actually bribe Osun with corn, where Osun, he would throw corn on the floor and Osun would be entertained eating it and fall asleep, right? So this went on and went on and went on until 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗍 kind of looked at his younger sons and said, you know, what's up with you guys? You guys look real depressed. And, you know, they didn't have the heart to tell their father what was going on. So in some versions, it spawned 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗍 the idea to go get divination. In another version, he just showed up early from work. And when he walked in on the unthinkable, where when he was about to curse Ogun cursed himself to never stop working. But Osun, being asleep, didn't get a chance to stop the curse. And 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗍 cursed him to, one, you know, never eat corn again. That's why in some Lukumi houses, corn is actually a taboo for Osun.
Really?
And, and he said, you'll never be able to sleep, you know. Until this day, Osun never sleeps. When you look at our Osun icon, it's somewhat, I mean, you could see that one was born from the other. You have the plate at the bottom, which provides the stability. You have a long, you know, staff. Then you have a cup. And within that cup, goes all of the ingredients that we, the Babalawo, provide to Osun, meaning that once again, Osun is the property of Orunmila and is distributed via his sons, the Babalawos, based on all of the information and Odu that we provided up until this point. Once again, everything is based on Odu, not tradition. There is no tradition without Odu Ifa. So all of those ingredients go in there, and then he's covered in this silver plate similar to the 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 one, but it instead of the 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗏, what goes on top is a rooster. Now, why is that? Because the rooster on this side of the world kind of had all of the characteristics that we saw 𝘃𝗶𝗱 to be able to defend and protect, right? And we're going to get into a couple odus that speak of that concept. But one of them is actually the Odu Otura Rosomon, Otura Irosun, ironically. And what happened here is the cup of Osun first manifested, where Osun, when he didn't have the cup, felt weak. He felt like he didn't have the materials necessary to be able to function, etc., or to be able to perform his function. He had a lot of things that he needed, and he had no way to carry it. Divination was performed, Otura Rosomon was revealed, where 𝗵𝗶𝗸𝗏 was prescribed with things, and from it, the cup was confectioned, and he was able to put everything he needed inside. But apart from that, there's also a story, and this is a traditional story in Otura Osun, where it speaks of why the rooster crows, or the rooster, based on divination, good character, and sacrifice, was able to become, the first bird to speak on earth.
Oh.
And, basically the story goes, the rooster felt slighted. The rooster felt undermined. He didn't feel like he had anything important to do. Apart from that, people were jealous of his appearance. He was very good looking. He was very imposing. He visited Orunmila. He performed sacrifice and was told to perform sacrifice when the sun came out, or to deposit it. And when he did that, 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 came behind him and kind of pinched him, and it caused the rooster to crow. So, deities like Oduduwa and Shango recognized this, that, based on the rooster waking them up, they were able to protect themselves from danger. They were able to become productive and accomplish things and progress as a society and a people. And that's why on this side, we ended up identifying the rooster to go on top of the Osun icon.
Is that also why the rooster starts the day?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was the first one to crow because there was a competition that was going to be occurring where all the other birds were going to basically try to sing or wake up. They were looking to see who was going to wake up Olodumare and the Orishas. And the rooster was like, I don't know. He really was kind of mute. He didn't know his song, or he didn't have confidence in it, or he thought it was ugly. And he had fear. But visiting Orunmila, by performing offerings to 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 and whatnot, 𝘃𝗶𝗏 kind of impulsed him into basically, cockadoodle doing. And it was such an alarming sound and such a vibrant sound that Olodumare said, whatever that was just woke me up. And then all the other birds showed up late, so the rooster ended up winning, right? And that's why till this day it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because on one behalf, had it not been for the rooster, would we have woken up as a humanity, as a people? Because you look at us beginning as agriculturists and ultimately becoming hunters and then progressing through evolution into modern man. I mean, without the rooster, would we have made any progress? Because back then we didn't have no light. You know what I'm saying? People were really waking up at 4 a.m. That's why the Babalawo, and when we went over this in the routines video, which I assume would come out before this one, that's the reason the Babalawo was always told to wake up at 4 a.m. Because that's the hour when the rooster starts crowing. I mean, all the guys, like all the wahidos and stuff like that, they're outside, they're getting up, they're ready to go before the sun comes up, because they're trying to take as much advantage of the sun as possible. Without the rooster, we wouldn't have known. So that's what Osun represents. He literally represents the dawn of humanity, the progress of humanity, alertness, productivity, progress, etc. And that really goes back to the importance of this energy and this tool. And that's why Orunmila identified him as an inseparable companion, because he's like, with this guy, I'm going to be able to accomplish everything. You notice people that wake up earlier, they're usually more successful. It's just the way it is, Yep. I mean, if you wake up at a certain time, you might have accomplished everything by 1 p.m., and then the rest of the day is yours. It's hard, especially from a modern standpoint. especially when you have responsibilities. But once you're able to get in that groove, it's lovely. If it was up to me, man, I'd honestly be in bed before 9. I really would. Wake up at like 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning, and just get it, because it is enjoyable to stay up late, watch TV. There's days for that. But if you have those kind of habits, I mean, where are we going? I mean, your health is going to suffer. You're going to become unproductive. It's going to affect everything negatively. And Osun is a reiteration of that.
Reminds me of the term early bird gets the worm.
And that's 𝗿𝗲𝗹𝗁. He was the first one to take advantage of the day. It's also why the rooster was able to grow bigger than all of the other birds on the farm, because he was the first one up. He was the first one who would eat. He was always in that superior position. And if you look at a farm, like when I go to get the animals for work and stuff like that, if you go early enough, you see the roosters walking around already, and the hens are sitting on top of the eggs. So it's a really wild concept, but they identified this thousands of years ago. So that's 𝗿𝗲𝗹𝗁. When we're talking about the icon, why do we give an Osun icon to everybody, whereas opposed in Nigeria, they give it to the 𝗵𝗸𝗍𝗍? What happened is when we all came over from Africa, a couple things got lost. Some of the tradesmanship and skills that the blacksmiths had over there, they might not have been able to bring it over here. So, and apart from that, materials, tools, etc., they weren't able to reconstruct the Osun icon exactly as it was in Nigeria. So when we got over here, they started constructing it basically out of what they had. So that's where you see, the difference in shapes and things like that. The height was greatly reduced because we went from, living on compounds for centuries, eons, what have you, and it never moving, to, hey, we live here, but now we're getting moved to this other apartment building, or we're going wherever we can survive. We have to be able to make things mobile. So that's where the Osun size shrunk. Apart from that, you're living in an apartment or a tenement. You don't have a lot of room for a 6-foot staff. The floor, you might not be able to dig like that. You might be on a 3rd floor, what have you. So all of these things were adapted to be able to make a very, accessible icon where you can continue your worship without completely uprooting your life. And then the reason we give it to everybody is because we didn't know who was going to survive. So, for example, you are coming to receive, right? And you're not a 𝗵𝗸𝗍𝗁. You might never become a 𝗵𝗸𝗁, but you might be the only one who survives. So let's give you a mini Osun icon, that represents your rank as just hand of Ifa, because Osun technically should only be given in the hand of Ifa, because there can be no Osun without Orunmila or Orunmila without Osun. Now, mind you, sometimes the brothers will give Osun with the warriors just to avoid backlash. But technically, if you look at 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏, Osun should not live anywhere near the 𝘃𝗏𝗃𝗏 shrine, right? Or any of those guys, because they betrayed him, right? So that's where this, this polemic comes from.
Is that like a negative energy there if you ended up doing something like that?
It's not. I mean, at the end of the day, it's done. Like, no one's dying over it. But it's not ideal, because when you look at Odu says they weren't compatible. Now, the reason Osun was also shortened in height to be able to live within the home was also position, right? So let's say you have Osun next to the warriors by the front door, but you have a toddler, and the toddler soccer kicks Osun, right? Not ideal, because at the end of the day, Osun fell over. It's not a huge deal because the toddler did it, but it's not ideal. So rather than that, they shortened it, and being that Orunmila lives up high, they put Osun next to Orunmila, which is my preferred position for anybody that receives with me. But, all these adaptations were made for survival and commodity, because we went from having these estates and being regal and all these other things to now we're living in the projects. So, we have to make things accessible. Things have to fit. So that's where you see the huge changes and adaptations made to the Osun icon versus how they look back in Nigeria. Osun initiation. This is a very polemic topic. When you go through the hand of Ifa, especially within the Lukumi process, some houses identify Osun as a viable head orisha or orisha labadori. I know quite a few. And they're doing just fine. There's old literature and things like that speaks of the initiation process for the children of Osun, specifically the men meant to become 𝗵𝗸𝗁, going through via the hands of the 𝗵𝗸𝗁s. So basically, if you were a son of Osun, it was pretty identifiable that you were going to end up being a 𝗹𝗶𝗹𝗶. They probably wouldn't even ask Osun for anybody that didn't have those characteristics. And they would take you through that process, and then they'd do Ifa to you. I respect our ancestors. I respect our liturgy. I respect all of those things. I personally don't propagate this because even though I do believe Osun is an Orisha, there's plenty of Orishas that don't necessarily get crowned, right? You have 𝗃𝗏𝗍, which I don't understand how anybody would crown that. There's certain deities like 𝗿𝗲𝗹𝗁 or 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗏. Like there's a bunch of other deities and energies. Not that they're lesser, but they're more auxiliary. Like they aid the main Orishas in their function, So me personally, I've never asked for Osun as a head Orisha within the hand of Ifa. And I've never been present for the initiation of a son of Osun. I do know a couple that are 𝗹𝗶𝗹𝗁s, and they're doing just fine. And I don't think it takes away from their legitimacy. I think that, for example, you can go in the hand of Ifa, and I could say, hey, are you a son of 𝗿𝗏𝗹𝗁? And if it says yes, I can't say that's wrong. We can't crown 𝗿𝗏𝗹𝗁. I guess your point of focus would be 𝗿𝗏𝗹𝗁. I don't know if I get that experimental in my practice. Simply, I don't know how productive it would be. But for the sons of Osun, I mean, for the ones I know, they're doing just fine. Some ended up doing Ifa, some did not. 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 says, it is possible. But me personally, within my practice, at least at this moment, we don't. But that doesn't mean that if you are, there's anything wrong with it. Just so you understand the dynamics behind the theology that led us to those conclusions. Our elders must have known something that, maybe none of us know, so to each his own. And I think that's the most important message when it comes to any of these things is that, whatever anybody chooses to practice within their home, substantiated by legitimate information, has to be respected. So that's another big point. But when we talk about the rooster concept once more, because I don't want to overlook that, the reason Osun went from being an 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁 in the old world to a rooster in the new world is in the 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁𝗃𝗏𝗿𝗃, right? In the 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗿 was where Osun was the personal assistant, butler of Olodumare, right? And this came with a lot of prestige. The rooster would walk around, people would admire him. Respect. That's Olodumare's right hand, and it caused a little bit of arrogance, or at least 𝗀𝗏𝗄 started noticing it. So just to be sure, 𝗀𝗏𝗄's like, I'm gonna test his character to see if he really is deserving of all of this, prestige. And 𝗀𝗏𝗄 ran up on the rooster or Osun and said, Olodumare loves me more than he loves you. And the rooster Osun looked and said, you're out of your mind. And 𝗀𝗏𝗄 was like, oh, well, prove it. He said, well, if Olodumare loved you more than me, you'd know that after 6 p.m., I take him a sponge bath. And 𝗀𝗏𝗄 was like, oh, I didn't know that. And the rooster was like, oh, damn. And 𝗀𝗏𝗄 went running back to the palace at 6:01 p.m. and started banging on the door. And said, Olodumare, are you running the bath water for Osun to go scrub you? And Olodumare was mortified, where he yanked 𝗀𝗏𝗄 into the house and said, how do you know that? He said, I don't know. He said, the only way you would know that is if the rooster betrayed me.
Oh, is this where your term, a little bird told me?
And then 𝗀𝗏𝗄 was like, well, you come to your own conclusions. And he was like, you bring him to me now.
Oh.
And 𝗀𝗏𝗄 kidnapped the rooster and brought him in front of Olodumare to be judged. And the rooster was crying. And Olodumare said, why would you say those things? Why would you betray me? Why would you come out of character like that? And the rooster said, I got angry. And Olodumare looked at the rooster and said, just because you got angry at 𝗀𝗏𝗄 doesn't mean you get to betray not only me, not only yourself, but your oath of good character. And the rooster begged for forgiveness, and Olodumare said, I can't forgive you because a secret's not a secret anymore. And basically, 𝗀𝗄𝗄 ate the rooster, right? Ooh. That's why till this day, Baba Ifa says that Osun became the rooster as a reminder to not speak those things that should not be spoken, to have good character. So when we look at that, we look at Oturaroso, it speaks of the positive characteristics of the rooster. But in 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁𝗃𝗏𝗿𝗃, it speaks of the very negative ones, right? Osun's life, you know, as we bring it full circle, it's kind of sad because, you know, you kind of look at this guy, he's constantly being taken advantage of. But the thing about it is when you find yourself in that position, you have to begin to wonder up until what point are you going to allow yourself to be taken advantage of? Because, you know, he could have easily made excuses and blamed everybody for everything. Oh, the Warriors got me drunk. Oh, 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 tricked me into betraying. Oh, this, oh, that. And, you know, when does it end? You know? And I think it's a message for everybody that, you know, we always have to be accountable. We always have to make sure that we do all that we can do to maintain our position and our prestige within our community and within our family, right? The thing about Osun also not being able to ever sleep, it's a pretty horrible damnation, you know?
Yeah.
Because sleep deprivation is torture, right? And Osun lives with that, you know, eternally. You know, so, you know, definitely a bunch of messages there. I'm sure he sleeps sometime, maybe. But, you know, it's definitely something to think about. But
What's the longest you've ever been without sleep?
who, me?
Yeah.
Oh, man, when my daughter was born, dog, I'll never forget the night before I was like, yo, I'm gonna have everything ready. I'm gonna be in bed by a certain time, have dinner. Like, I had it all. It was so perfect. I'm like, this is gonna be great. I'm gonna have a full night of sleep. We'll be holding my baby. I didn't sleep that night at all. So I woke up that day at around, I don't know, 7-ish, 8-ish. I was supposed to go to bed around 9-ish. And from 9 to like 4 in the morning, it was very in and out, like 5 minutes, wake up. You know, it was just a very active night with the baby before she was born. And then the next day, you know, we had to be there like 6 in the morning. So mind you, from 6 in the morning all the way to like, you know, I guess 6 in the morning, dog. It was definitely over 24 hours, you know. Okay. It's definitely, you know, for all parents and parents to be, you know what I'm talking about, or get ready. You know what I'm saying? Because it's just one of those things. You don't sleep. So that's kind of Osun's existence. You know what I'm saying? He's always tense. He's always alert. A lot of people say that, you know, he sleeps until he falls over. You know, when you look at the 4 conical bells in the New World, how they kind of, you know, dangle, it's basically born from the conical bells that are upright when you move Osun back and forth, you know. But the Osun staff plays a huge role in the whole spirituality. It guards Ife. No initiation can be done without Osun Ifa. You know, is basically there from the dawn. Definitely an icon that, you know, provides a lot of stability and firmness for all. It's definitely one that should not be opened either. I think that's another really key fact is, you know, we're living in a time now where everybody wants to, you know, make sure, you know, make all these different things. Like when I give Osun to my god kids, I don't cement anything. I don't seal anything. You know, I close it, but I tell them, I said, hey, don't look inside. If you look inside, that's on you. You know, I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, there's going to be negative consequences there because if Osun represents consciousness or Ori and the stability of it, most importantly, and the maintenance of it, you're literally kind of performing spiritual brain surgery on your own. You know, when you open that thing up and you're looking inside and whatnot, that's not convenient. So no one should be looking inside the Osun that was given to you by your padrino other than your padrino or your yubona under that direction and permission. You know, we have to maintain ethics and things like that. Like I've had people come to receive hand of Ifa with an Osun from somebody else. And my first and only question really is, was Osun given to you by Babalao? And if they say no, then I give them a new one because that Osun is not legitimate. And if they say yes, I completely leave it alone, regardless of what they say afterwards. Hey, it feels kind of light. Hey, I heard this is supposed to go in it. All these other, you know, nonsensical conversations. At the end of the day, there has to be ethical appreciation towards a fellow professional. If a Babalao made it, I have no reason to go inside of that icon whatsoever. And I don't, and I haven't, regardless of who made it, whether I agree with their, you know, concepts or not. It's, you know, professional respect. Osun, like I said, can go next to the Warriors. I prefer him going next to Orunmila. There's another interesting story in the Odu of, you can find it in 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏. or 𝗿𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏, where it's the Ifa of the scarecrows. And what happened was Orunmila had a farm, and the farm was constantly being attacked by crows. And the crows would come and eat the corn and the crops and whatever they could and kind of decimate his yield. This was a big issue because he was losing money. The wife wasn't happy. So he did divination. And one of these odus was revealed where Ifa told him to basically confection a tool that was going to be able to scare away the birds based on the materials, etc. And ultimately he confectioned Osun, right? And he planted it right in the middle of the field. So when the crows came, and the crows were the 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏, when the crows came to decimate, they saw a bird made out of metal, and they were like, oh my God, leave that guy alone, and they all flew away. So from that day forward, Orunmila said, this is mine, and it stays in front of my home. Osun actually plays a huge role when it comes to defense against the 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏, because when the 𝗃𝗏 see Osun in the home, they think twice about installing the ajogun within that domicile, because birds respect birds. You know what I'm saying? So that's a really interesting point, and that's also one of the points why Osun was given to everybody on a much lesser scale. The original one is like the one you see in 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗃, or the one you see given with Oduduwa in the Lukumi context. And that's another great point to touch on, and I'm happy I remembered that, because when you receive Oduduwa, there's a couple different Osuns, first and foremost. But not every staff is a Osun, even though it may resemble it. Like, if you go to, like, Nigeria, you see the various priesthoods having their own, like, power staff. Like, the Babalaos will have Osun and the Iroke, or they'll have, like, a horn kind of looking thing that's beaded. It's like a power symbol. From what I understand, it's actually meant to resemble the obelisk that can be found in Ife, which supposedly is the cornerstone of humanity. That's why all of these like phallic, long, erect things kind of exist, because they reiterate, when Oduduwa came down, or when he arrived in Ife and constructed this power symbol of strength. But you're going to see those, like the priests of Obatala have a staff. Everybody has a staff. Everybody has something that they lean upon. But then when you look on our side, you have the Osun of the hand of Ifa. Then you have another Osun, which you might see that comes to the knee. That's more property of the Babalaos at that point, which it has its own connotations when you receive or go through certain processes. But where you see the big, tall Osun de extensión, as it's known, is usually when you receive Oduduwa. Now, ironically, that Osun resembles basically the other one quite a bit, because that Osun sometimes doesn't come with a rooster on top. It'll have a dove or something that looks in flight, kind of like the 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏 bird does, right? And it's given with Oduduwa. But technically, that Osun is the Osun of the Babalaos. So technically, that Osun shouldn't be given to anyone who isn't a Babalawo, even if they've received Oduduwa or not, because that is the power symbol of Orunmila that was identified in 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏, Osakuleya, or even going back to Oturaroso, where Oduduwa recognized the bird for having the great qualities upon which he could construct a civilization, waking up early, good habits, etc. So technically, that really is only for Babalaos. And then you actually look at the connotations between Oduduwa and the Ogboni cult, where a lot of the old Babalaos would say when the Babalawo receives Oduduwa, it was like their version or way of inducting somebody into Ogboni, being that religion and spirituality and council didn't make it over in force to Cuba. It had common themes from an initiatory standpoint, etc. And if you notice, the Ogboni, they carry a staff. They have their shawl. They have all these different things. Ironically, the shawl looks like feathers, and they say it's supposed to represent truthfulness or honesty. So all of those themes can be seen. When we look at like taboos and things like that, Osun's taboos are Orunmila's taboos. So I really wouldn't offer black palm kernel oil, but everything that Orunmila eats, Osun eats. Because if Osun eats every time Orunmila eats, he eats everything Orula eats. Mm-hmm. So you'll see some houses that say, no, don't put red palm oil on Osun. This comes from the false idea that Osun is property of Obatala, which he is not. And even if he was, Osun and 𝗏𝗶𝗸𝗏 are not the same person or deity. If you look at the audio of 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 or 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏, it says that Osun should be consecrated with red palm oil. Because you have some houses who say, no, the only thing that goes on top of Osun is cascarilla or efun and shea butter or ori or cacao. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because when you look at scripture, when we actually study and look at what was left behind to us from Orunmila, Osun eats everything Orunmila eats, but apart from that, 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 ended up becoming his preferred food source, because it says that the way Osun was able to maintain the caloric necessities to be able to stay up was by consuming this highly caloric grease of red palm oil. It kind of kept his engines and motors running, and then you look at the connotations between the red palm oil and the 𝗃𝗏𝗎. Osun would cover himself in red palm oil to satisfy the 𝗃𝗏𝗎 before they tried to go into Orunmila's house. It was a way to deflect. So, it's very important to understand the taboos, but even more important is to understand what they're able to eat. Because if we deprive certain orishas of certain ingredients, we're never going to get the results we want, and then we blame the orishas when in reality we have to blame our own study habits.
Well, so when that happens, how do you, in the other religions, you have to repent and do all that stuff to get penance, right? Mm-hmm. Is there like a version of that in Ifa?
No, I don't. I mean, you could say you're sorry, but I mean, at the end of the day, repercussions are repercussions. You have to give it time. Like, for example, God forbid somebody puts salt on 𝗏𝗸𝗏. You can wash 𝗏𝗏𝗏 real well. You can do all these other things. Nothing might happen. Accidents happen. But, at the same time, if something does happen, no matter how much you wash and do all these other things, effects are effects. Like 𝗏𝗶𝗸𝗏 says, we can be sorry for our actions, but we still have to face the consequences. What's done is done. That's why the phrase 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗏 exists, because, we can't undo what we've done. So, there's going to be certain things that we have to support the consequences, but malicious intent or lack thereof is going to influence that a lot. An accident's an accident, but if you intentionally are doing things wrong, or if you're not preparing yourself enough to do things right, you're not going to do as well as the person who is like, hey, my bad. You know what I'm saying? And everybody does it. Everybody makes a mistake, at the beginning of their career. Somebody's always going to do something that they could have done better. The key is like the 𝗃𝗶𝗍𝗏 says, is don't make the same mistake twice and you'll do just fine. But mistakes we have to make. But as long as they're a mistake, intention has a lot to do with it, So, but Osun's great. I think Osun is a great message within Ifa.
Yeah.
I think he's saved a bunch of people. He's helped a bunch of people. That's really what I got. I mean, there's a bunch of great pataquis that we've been able to relay. And, I think the lasting message with Osun is stay alert, stay vigilant. Don't allow yourself to be taken advantage of. Take control of your life. Have good habits, wake up early, be active.
Yeah.
And I think, we'll be okay if we take those things into account, messages from Opa Osun.
All right. Well, guess what time it is, my man?
Oh, my favorite. I'm loving this new music, man.
Yeah.
It's cognac music.
Right? Low light, a little cigar.
Not here. You're blinding me here today.
I know.
You got me shining.
I know. You're glowing today.
Yeah.
But this is the segment where we talk about our membership program.
Very nice.
So, guys, you can join our membership program. It offers several perks for each and every one of you. We have different tiers that offer, different perks, whether it's discounts on merch, free chats with us, private chats, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So this one's going to be a little bit different, right?
Okay.
Because a few weeks ago, we forgot somebody.
Oh, no.
Do you remember that person?
Oh, man. Was it...
I got it here. All right. So this whole entire segment is just for you, bro.
I'm loving it.
This is just for fair, never sorry.
Absolutely.
You
We're so
remember, and your shout out to you.
Oh, man. Big shout out to Fair Never Sorry. Thank you so much for being a part of the membership program. Let somebody else know about it so we can shout them out as well. We're all about accountability here. You are the best part of our Roots podcast. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so we will catch you guys later.
See the light.
See ya.